Hi, I'm Chris Fleming, the creator of Spirit Talk. You're listening to the podcast where I'll be bringing you the greatest thinkers, researchers, and contributors from around the world to discuss what we know in the field of the paranormal, life after death, and the pursuit of higher consciousness.
If we go back 300, 400, 500 years to the medieval period, people were claiming to hear voices, were told that it was demons. You know, they were locked up because they were told that, yeah, these voices are demonic forces and we need to, drive the demons out of you, thrash the demons out of you. Fast forward to today and people are being told that it's all in the mind, it's all psychological, there's nothing going on. I think that actually the reality is somewhere in the middle ground.
Hey everybody, I want to share something with you. Do you like artwork? What? Artwork? Yes, artwork. You see, I got a BA in fine art years ago when I went to college. But over the years, I started drawing some of my experiences as well as during some of my reading, some of the visions that I would see using the creative process. So what I did was I decided, because a lot of people were saying, hey, I love your artwork. Can we get a print? So I made a limited edition run of some of those pieces of artwork, and I'm now offering them to you. If you like colorful, mysterious, supernatural works of art, go check out my website on Etsy. That's ETSY. The web address is www.etsy.com/shop, /Christopher's Art Store. That's Christopher's Art Store. And you can check out these fine limited edition Gicle prints. And if you order now, you can get 15% off if you use the code SPIRIT, SPIRIT. Check out these collectible pieces today. Hey, it's Chris Fleming. Welcome back to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. Well, my guest this episode is Jayne Harris, my teammate and co-presenter along with Barri Ghai on the Discovery Network TV series on Really Channel, Help My House is Haunted, which is currently airing right now in its second season in the UK. Now, Jayne's also been featured as an investigator in Paranormal Captured for Sky TV's Pick Channel, and an expert on 6 episodes of Unexplained Caught on Camera for the Really Channel, which is doing really well. She is currently producing her second documentary, Afterlife, which features Toya Wilcox, Rupert Sheldrake, and Dr. Penny Satori, and many other fascinating contributors. If you want to check out this documentary, you can go to www.afterlifedoc.com. Let's bring her on the show. Hey, Jayne, how are you?
Hi, Chris. I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, you're very welcome, my dear. Now, you've done so many different things. I've been looking at your bio. I mean, you've got researcher, psychologist, historian, writer, tutor, events management. You got your hands in many things.
Well, do you know what, Chris? There's a saying, isn't there? A jack of all trades, master of none. I do, yeah. I do quite a lot. I keep myself busy. I keep myself out of trouble.
Well, the one thing I love about you is your knowledge and your interest in history, because look in here, you're one of UK's most respected professionals in the field of paranormal research and been exploring for over 20 years. You've got a background in psychology and history, and you got this no-nonsense attitude combined with an endless curiosity in all things mysterious. Now, you were in 2016, you were described as Britain's foremost female paranormal investigator by Vice magazine, and right now you've been nominated for the Higgy Pop Award. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. I know. Exciting. It sounds like you're describing someone else. That sounds pretty impressive.
I know. It's pretty weird when you step back and you look at some of these things like, wow, I did all that? Wow.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing I want to talk about is obviously the reason why you got into your fascination with history, and also you've got a BS in psychology and criminology. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, psychology. So I took an interest in the criminal mind, so forensic psychology. I think I thought that I'd end up working in prisons.
Really?
But yeah, I just kind of, I always had this fascination with the criminal mindset, right the way through from sort of petty things all the way up to sort of serial killers, which sounds really macabre and grim, but I just found it fascinating, how people's minds can be so different from each other, how one person can do something and think that that's absolutely fine, that's normal, not have any remorse, and other people simply couldn't live with themselves if they did something like that.
Right.
So yeah, psychology was for me. I've always been a people watcher.
Well, you were local authority in adult mental health services, so obviously you sat down with a lot of people. You listened to them, you studied them, you talked to them. What was the one thing that you found that was common? I mean, are you able to share some of this information? Tell me.
Yeah. I think the one thing that pretty much everyone, all of my sort of clients, as we call them, everyone had in common was that deep down on some level, everyone just wants to be heard, wants to be listened to. It can take a long time to get there for some people. You need to chat. Literally, it could be for 6 months. You see someone twice a week for 6 months and they finally open up to you. Mm-hmm. Other people are just desperate to tell you their story. And within 10 minutes, you know pretty much everything. So I think at the core of all of us is just this desire to connect with other human beings and to be listened to, and to be heard and understood. Some people are more closed. I'm a fairly private person myself. I don't, tell everyone my life story. But, when you get to know people, most of us do like talking about ourselves and our situations and maybe getting other opinions on it. So everyone was very, very different. I dealt with a range of mental illnesses, really, all the way from just anxiety and depression through to psychosis and schizophrenia. And those people, actually, the people suffering with schizophrenia, were actually very, very vulnerable and very fragile. And it was interesting because those were the people that society were actually afraid of. The people who walk around talking to themselves or think that they can see things or think that they're being followed, that there are conspiracies around them. Those people are actually really vulnerable and need protecting. But most of society will walk over to the other side of the road when they see them. They think, oh, avoid them. Weirdos. And so, I think, it was important. I enjoyed the work that I did. The problem with it, because I worked for a local authority, you have to fit people into boxes. Mm-hmm. And that's what I always found really difficult, because you kind of have all of this paperwork. You have to tick the boxes, write down people's behaviours, why you think it is, what's happened. And I soon realised that not everyone fits in these boxes. There are some people who need to kind of blur between 2 or even 3. And it's kind of getting that across. You just can't pigeonhole people in that way. There are traits, schizophrenics do all share certain traits. People with depression share certain things, but it's just such a grey area. It's so different for everyone. So I kind of threw in the towel on that after about 6 years, and I just thought it's not what I thought it might be. I went into it to help people. I was intrigued by human psychology, and I thought I was a fairly good listener, and I hoped that I was good at kind of helping people, but ultimately, for me, I just felt that I couldn't do enough, not within the framework that was set to me. You're very restricted, especially in sort of health services and local government, definitely.
It's fascinating because I'm listening to what you're saying, and something you just said resonates with me is, when I went to college, I got a degree in fine art, but then I was also working towards a degree in psychology. And I became troubled by some of the things that I was experiencing, witnessing, because I thought, well, I'll get a degree in psychology. It'll help me understand the paranormal more and everything. And obviously I found out that they didn't really talk about the paranormal. That was actually parapsychology. But when I got into abnormal psychology and studying that, I remember I asked a couple questions, and I remember the professor completely ignored the question. And I was really thrown off by that, and I was actually a little angry about that. I remember when they were talking about schizophrenia, they were talking about hallucinations. I asked them, I said, well, has anybody ever done any studies or tests that these things that these people are seeing, what if they're all seeing the same thing? And if they're seeing the same thing, how could it be possible from person to person? The teacher just looked at me and turned and said, okay, everybody turn to chapter 5. And I was just like, are you kidding me? I mean, I'm asking a logical question, because if something's going on with their brain that's allowing them to see something that we can't see, which we know now, we only see 10% of electromagnetic spectrum, the visual spectrum. What if they're seeing something, the brain is allowing them to recognize or see something that we don't see? Has there been studies to see what they're seeing and if it's consistent? But I was completely ignored, and then later on I asked another question about ghosts or spirits and was completely ignored about that. So I was like, how am I going to go into this if they don't even acknowledge any of those things? And then, like you just stated, a lot of these people have a lot of sadness. They have a lot of emotion, things that they've gone through. From a day-to-day basis in communicating and working with these people, what would it do to the counselor? How do you get rid of all those emotions? Because in high school and college, I was not in complete control of all my emotions. I was hearing voices and this and that, and then I began to realize, wow, these are spirits and stuff, because we record them through EVP. How would I be able to cleanse myself as an empath from all these people's emotions? And I felt I wouldn't be able to do it. So that's got to be hard for some of these counselors and these psychologists and even psychotherapists, is day after day to just remove all those emotions, to go home to family, whatever, and have just a regular day. Did you ever find that was troubling at times with all those emotions and feelings?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you have to do in the training leading up to working with the public is you do have to actually go through counselling yourself. So you sit in groups and you kind of counsel each other, and you learn your listening skills, and then you learn your talking skills. But you're quite vulnerable, really, because you do, right. You have to, if you go into that kind of helping field, the field of helping other human beings, we've all got our own issues. So you do have to kind of learn how to package that, how to put that somewhere else and really make it completely about the person that you're helping. But of course, the difficulty with that, of course, is like you say, you go home, and I had a young girl with schizophrenia, and she had paranoid psychosis as well. So she was completely paranoid. She thought that the world was conspiring against her, and she would see the same person in cars, in helicopters, walking down the street. She thought this person was a clone, that there were multiple 10 or 20 people, and that they were all after her for some reason. And it was trying to get to the core of why does she think that. And I'd go home and I'd just imagine her, walking home from our session. How many times did she see that person? Did she get in a taxi or did she not, because she saw that person? And it can stay with you. I think the only way really you can kind of avoid that is by, they call it compartmentalizing it. So you compartmentalize it. You say, okay, I'm going to package that there. It's helpful, actually. Visualization, Chris. I know you do this, don't you? With the when you kind of think, okay, so I can see a box, and then there's a color and all that kind of stuff. And it's almost like that. You think, right, so all of this conversation that we've just had, all of those feelings, all of those emotions, it's finished now until next time. So we package it all away. We lock the box. We put it away, and then next time we meet, we'll bring the box out, we'll unlock it, we'll open it, and we'll explore all of that again. But, we're all human. It's difficult. There were times when I'd just go home and cry, and think, wow, that person is now all on their own. I'm at home, I'm here, I'm comfortable, I'm happy, I've got family around me, and that person's on their own. So, yeah, it's difficult. I think to really spend a lifetime in that kind of field, to make it your career for 40, 50 years, you have to be a certain kind of person. Not necessarily a cold-hearted person, nothing like that, but someone who can say, right, this is work, this is home, they're completely different. I could never really do that. Because I had a genuine interest in it. It wasn't just a job for me. I went into it because I genuinely wanted to help people. Right. And it's frustrating because you can't fix everyone. You can't always help people. And I suppose you know that, Chris. You read for people and they come to you, don't they? Because they want to hear something that makes them feel better. They want contact. They want messages from loved ones. They want to know they're okay.
Right.
And we sort of can't always fix everything for everyone.
No, we can't. And you know, some of the cases that we've done, I get so emotional because I want to help these people, and we got to do it this way and that way. And it's like, you just want to connect with them and find those answers. And it gets frustrating at times.
Yeah.
And it's because you're like, that's why we're here, I'm very fortunate that I have friends that are psychotherapists, psychologists that have been doing this for a long time, because we communicate like annually. We'll talk on the phone. We'll talk about certain cases and things that are going on. And then sometimes we work on cases together. Whatever real big cases come up, we will sit down and we discuss it and figure out a game plan. And I find it fascinating. I remember years ago, back in the 90s, there was a psychologist. I remember I wasn't talking to my father. My dad and I were both Tauruses. We weren't talking. My mom goes, you need to go talk to someone. I go, I'm not going to go see a counselor. I know how to deal with this. She's like, no, go talk to someone. So I said, I'm going to go talk to someone about my dad. So I went for about a month and a half talking to him. We ended up getting into these other conversations. It was fascinating because I learned so much from some of the things he was talking about. And I remember asking him once, and we didn't talk about the paranormal because it just didn't want to talk about that. We just went in and we talked about my dad. But I remember asking him, I said, do you ever deal with people that have multiple personality disorder? And he says, oh, yeah. Yeah. I said, have you ever asked those personalities their names, who they are, where they come from, and then looked up and researched to see if they actually existed? He looked at me like, no, I haven't. I go, what if some of those personalities actually are spirits that existed at one time and that are coming through? He's like, you know what? And then he tells me, he says, between you and I, he was like, I'm going to tell you this one person. He says, they started describing something, and it was the detail, he says, was just fascinating about a certain timeline that this person existed. So he said he started researching and looking into that and became fascinated by books of past lives and stuff like that. And he started instituting some of those things with some of his clients. So it's really interesting. Like you said, you put everything into a box, and even psychology sometimes will put everything to a box. They will categorize, well, you're either this, if the diagnosis is showing those signs. Have you ever run into individuals that you felt might have an attachment, or there could be something going on with them? Or was that not your mindset at the time?
No, it absolutely was, because I've always had an interest in the paranormal as well. It's just something that you can't get away from and you can't switch off.
Right.
And when sometimes I'd be speaking to people and they'd say, they'd tell me about visions they'd had, usually in the middle of the night. They'd wake up, see something at the foot of the bed, and I'd think, oh my God, but I can't say to you what I think it is. I just have to listen to you tell me your experiences. And in that role, I was being paid to be their therapist. I couldn't then say, well, actually, you might not be alone. Other people see these things,
Right.
Google it. It's like, so yeah. And funny you say about split personalities. I had the exact same thought on multiple occasions when people would say to me, I said to them, write down. So when you next feel like you're Vera, start writing. Write down, how you feel today. What can you see? What do you like to wear? And I said, just have a look at that, because it might help you. And it's just fascinating. They would bring these little diaries to me of the days when they were feeling like these different people and personalities. And I often thought, what if this is a real person? What if this is someone in spirit coming through? And it's the same with the hearing voices. People with psychosis who are hearing voices constantly telling them to do things. Right. I would think, well, what if they are actually hearing voices?
Exactly.
What if it's not that they're insane? We're sort of telling them they're insane for hearing voices, but what if they are hearing them? And that was the other conflict for me with the role, was that I just was being told to recommend certain things to people, or being told to explain their experiences to them in a certain way. And I wasn't fully sold on the explanation myself.
Right.
Because some of them I would think, well, they may well be hearing voices. What are the voices telling you? Write it down. Right. Try to ask the voices questions in your mind. Think a question and see if the voice gives you an answer. So, yeah, I was kind of already doing the parapsychology role, I suppose, without really knowing it. But it just became one of those things. I've never been very good with, not with authority, but if I don't kind of agree with the framework that's there, if I don't agree with what I'm being told to do, I find it quite difficult to do it, or to... Right. implement it in the way that I'm working. So I did find it difficult, not talking about certain things. I'd have conversations with my manager because she knew I was into the paranormal. She knew that one of my hobbies was researching different things and going out on investigations and stuff. And we had a conversation about it. And I said to her, some of these people would be fascinating for experiments. And she's like, whoa, don't even go. I was like, no, I won't. But seriously, some of these people, they're hearing voices. I would love to ask these different personalities questions. So yeah, you're right. It's one of those things that I kind of reached a point where I had to almost choose.
Right.
And I chose obviously the paranormal. That was where my kind of real passion ended up being.
And I just think that's fascinating about you, and I think that's something that brings so much more depth to our cases and what we do. I wish that, and I hope for this, and I think within time it will occur, that psychology will start opening up its doors a little bit more and working with people in the paranormal field to understand how consciousness can be affected and how consciousness exists outside the body, such as what they study in parapsychology. Because I've worked with therapists in the past with subjects they've had that have been suffering from certain things. I won't go into all the details, but I know that with their permission and permission from the family, I've been able to sit down with these individuals and communicate with what was there, have it come through, validate it using various means, and then removing it, as spirit attachments, as we call it, walk-ins, jump-ins. Sometimes these spirits will jump in and they'll jump out. So people says, well, how can you prove it? How can you validate it? Well, one of the things is just using something that's been around for a long period of time, EVP. A couple years ago, I got a call that there was an Afghan vet. He was a Navy SEAL, fought in Somalia and Afghanistan. And he was suffering from PTSD. He was also getting these, as they were calling them, hallucinations, but also he was hearing voices, and the voices wouldn't stop. It was driving him crazy. So I drove to his house with a friend. Sat down with some of the family members, discussed, and then he came into the room. And right away when he came into the room, I felt this overwhelming sense of just, I don't want to say peace, but I felt this sense that, wow, this guy is really honest. I just felt, I didn't feel anything negative attached to him. But as soon as we started talking about these negative things he was seeing, I felt it come into the room. And I asked, what is the biggest thing you want to know? He says, I just want to know that I'm not crazy, and that if I am crazy, what can I do? Because these voices won't stop. So I turned to the other family members in the room. I said, do you hear these voices he hears? They said, no. I said, what would be for you something that would put you at rest? He says, well, if we'd be able to hear these voices and to know that, this is going on. I said, okay. So I started putting myself out there and saying, the entity that's here, come forward. I started getting these visions in my head, these images. I started telling him. He says, yep, that's correct. That's correct. Started seeing places he was going to, like in a form of remote viewing. I said, what is the one thing that you hear a lot? And he says, well, telling me to go to war. And that these spirits are telling me I should go back. I feel I should go back because 2 of the Navy SEALs, we were called the 5, 2 of them died when we were in Somalia. They were captured and they were killed in front of us. It was a horrific thing he went through. It would be traumatic for anybody. So I took out my digital recorder and I said, one of the entities here from Somalia, I know you're here. I can sense you. What is it you want to say? I'm recording. I stop it. I play it back. Right after my question, you hear, go to war. Everybody in the room screams. The family members scream, like, oh my God, and they cover their mouths, and he just sits there, doesn't even move, just closes his eyes and shakes his head up and down. Yep. And I said, that's what you hear? He says, yep. The other people are like, how come we can't hear that? And I said, well, as you know, we've only been studying a lot of things about the brain for like 100 years. And the one thing is we're learning now is that there are brain frequencies, and those frequencies are kind of like radio frequencies. And they've discovered through QEEGs that the brain emits and receives different frequencies. Some people can hear things while other people's are on a different frequency and they don't pick up on it. These entities, these spirits, have figured out somehow, because of their conscious energy, what frequencies to tune in on so only that person receives that frequency. So You heard it, and we did it again, and we had another response. So using EVP, in this particular case, I was able to validate that there are voices, and these voices coincide with what he's saying. What does this mean for the field? I don't know. Down the road, can this be instituted? Can they find ways? And then how do you work on these attachments? Well, that's a whole nother subject. But what fascinates me is the stuff that we don't see and we don't hear, but certain people do. What methods can be used to either disprove or validate it? Then once we figure that out, work on some type of plan to then help that individual.
Yeah. And I think the main thing is to try and, like you say, you do something so that other people are aware, that they have an awareness. Now, EVP is a perfect example of that, isn't it? People say, well, why use a recorder? Why use EVP? Well, it's so that you have it there for everyone. You may hear something, I may hear something, but if we're not capturing it and playing it back and allowing other people to hear it as well, then we may as well call ourselves crazy.
Right.
Because it's like, okay, I mean, how important was that for that guy to know that he wasn't going mad, that he had been hearing that voice telling him to do that?
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
The thing is, too, is in all respect to psychology and the incredible field that is, there are many individuals that are suffering, damage to the brain, that are suffering chemical imbalances, and those emit certain chemicals that causes the emotional reactions, the hallucinations, and some of the things they deal with that are legitimate, just defragmentation of the brain. It's not anything paranormal. I know a case that I was brought in that was like adamant, like, oh my God, there's horrific things happening to this house. Please come, and it's emergency. So I go to the house, I bring a friend, and what I do in some of my cases is sometimes I'll film them. I'll get this feeling, I need to film this. I need to film this for legal reasons, right? Mm-hmm. So I had the whole thing documented and filmed. And what I quickly noticed when I looked around the house is certain areas of the house were hoarded. I mean, there was stuff stacked upon stacked. And I noticed some OCD things as well, where there was certain items that were stacked completely straight up. And they were in the middle of the room. I'm like, okay, so this person is trying to create some organization within their mind because they're defragmented. Their mind's going all over the place. And as we went through the house, he was jumping to this and this. Do you see the demons that are in the wall? There was obviously pareidolia. It was just images and grain, certain grain and textures that were in the panels that looked like this or that. You could do the Rorschach test and it'd be really interesting what he would see. But I found out that every little thing had to become demonic or paranormal. And it wasn't. Quickly realized doing EVP and everything else that there really wasn't much there. It was this person had gone through some really dramatic and painful things in their life, and they were trying to create some identity and to explain away this ADHD that they were having, this obsessive compulsive and everything else. There are mental disorders. There are these problems. There are these things. It becomes difficult at times to decipher between the two, but sometimes you can have these problems and have something paranormal going on as well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've run into that also.
Well, yeah, and this is a difficult thing. I mean, what we have to remember is that if we go back 300, 400, 500 years to the medieval period, people were claiming to hear voices, were told that it was demons. They were locked up because they were told that, these voices are demonic forces and we need to, drive the demons out of you, thrash the demons out of you. Fast forward to today, and people are being told that it's all in the mind, it's all psychological, there's nothing going on. I think that actually the reality is somewhere in the middle ground. I think some people, as you say, are having these experiences which we would classify as paranormal. Other people aren't, but there are going to be the people in the middle. That's the grey area, people who which came first, the paranormal experience or the mental health problem. There's a big thing around, well, do people with mental health issues have a predisposition to experiencing something paranormal? Is their brain wired up differently so they are more open to these experiences? Or vice versa, does something happen to them which then causes the mental health problems? Do they have a genuine paranormal experience which stays with them for the rest of their life in the form of mental illness? So, it's just crazy. I think people these days who just assume that, oh, okay, he says he's hearing voices, he's crazy. It's no better than the medieval doctors saying, oh, he's hearing voices, it's demons. You can't just assume one or the other. And that's the difficulty. But I think, we're progressing slowly in the field of paranormal, really, I think. I think people try to move quickly and it doesn't work. I think there's lots more work to be done. I'm personally really interested in, and I know you are as well, Chris, in ITC, and, trying desperately to get these kind of validations for people, because that's when you hear that voice, when you hear a voice and it's clear and, there's no auditory pareidolia, we're not imagining the words that are being said, the words are just there, then that is just electric. When that happens and you're like, wow, can you hear that? Yeah. And you all get it. It's just wow.
When you take a look at, yogis and channelers and people that have done meditations for thousands of years and will sometimes state that they're communicating with this higher consciousness and they're hearing the voices and they're relaying that to the people, is how do we know for sure? And in many cases, they are actually doing that. But how do we find a common ground that we can validate that? And that's one of the reasons. I remember in 1976, I'm with my mom. Our house was haunted. We were having stuff happen all the time. Babysitters were coming and going because they couldn't stand being in our house when these things were happening. My mom wanted answers, so we did the Ouija board all the time because that's what we had at our disposal to use. And then this show comes on, a commercial for The Amazing World of Psychic Phenomena, 1976. And I'm like, oh my God, Mom, we got to watch this because it's talking about ghosts, it's talking about this, and they're getting voices. And I remember I sat on my mom's lap and we watched it. And it showed the haunted house, and then it showed these investigators with a reel-to-reel recorder playing back spirit voices. And then they show these investigators going to a graveyard and capturing voices. Oh my God, we can record the voices of the ghosts in our house. So within a month, my dad comes home with this reel-to-reel player. And next thing you know, I'm putting the reel-to-reel player in front of the Ouija board, and I'm telling the Ouija, because back then I used to call it Ouija, Ouija, will you talk to us? Not realizing that the Ouija is not an entity, it's just a board. But when you're a little kid, you don't know, right?
That's his name.
So I'm like, Ouija, will you talk to me? And I started recording voices. And when I got them, I was just excited. I was playing it for some of the kids in the neighborhood. Some of the parents were complaining. And my dad's like, you can't go playing for this to everybody in the neighborhood. That got me into ITC. And I realized that, when your house is haunted, not everybody's going to believe you. But if you can capture the voices, then you have some type of evidence. And as a medium, as an empath, as a sensitive, over all the years that I've been communicating with spirits, I've always instituted ITC because I want to make sure that what I'm coming in contact with is exactly what it is. And even though I know it is and I get the results on the ITC, it's something that I say, hey, if you're not taking my word for it, here, listen to this. This is what they're saying. And I think it goes hand in hand, part paranormal, part mediumship. And what we found is, and I know there's been studies on this, is when people start to get attached to their devices, they start opening up themselves to the spirit world, and the results they get are better and better and better. And I know you've gotten some great EVPs. I mean, we can't tell you what, but during this season, you captured some remarkable EVPs.
Yeah, and some that actually no one will ever get to hear because we can't we can't use everything, can we? So they're like, oh my God, no one's ever going to hear that. Amazing.
I know it's horrible. All three of us have talked about that, and what do we do with all this great evidence that you're never going to get to hear?
I mean, for us as investigators, it's just exciting anyway. We share it, we hear it. It's like, oh my God, that's amazing. And what we captured, which I'm not going to give anything away, I won't spoil anything for people, but not just voices,
right.
Echoes of the past events. When you realize that actually that energy, that residual energy, it's always there. It's always lingering. If you can just tap into it, either on the right frequency or right vibration, then it's still there. When you stand in a place, please let us hear, the events of this house. Please let us hear the echoes of the past. And you're recording, and then you capture something, a sound or whatever. It's just like, wow. And it really makes you forces you to rethink your beliefs around reality. Because is the world 3-dimensional, or is it 4-dimensional? Is it 5-dimensional? You know, what's going on? Is time linear, or is time all over the place and we're just kind of moving along in our version of time, you know, this linear time that we have created, that man has created? So it's the big question, and it just gets bigger. And I think actually that's why a lot of scientists steer clear of the subject, because it doesn't fit. It does not fit the box. You know, a mainstream scientist will avoid the paranormal, will avoid analysing the unexplained, because it just doesn't fit anywhere. You know, their doctrine, what they've been taught, what they believe is A, B, C. If you're giving them evidence that is D or E, they've got nowhere to put it. So they choose to disbelieve.
Right.
This is a problem. It's a problem for people who actually genuinely believe, like me. I think that science could be one of the biggest helps when it comes to actually proving, you know, the existence of an afterlife, of the paranormal.
And think about all the different research that's been done that we don't know about by various governments, you know, top secret stuff like that. I mean, I've reviewed, you and I have discussed the Gateway, you know, that Army intelligence did in the 1980s, talking about consciousness outside the body. And I know when I met Lynn Buchanan in 2006 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, you know, he had worked on the remote viewing program with the military, and Joe McGonigal and all these other people that he was side by side with. And he discussed to myself and 3 other individuals, you know, because we went to his house for 4 days and we trained with him on remote viewing. He shared with us stuff that I have to say, at that time in 2006, I didn't understand it. It was new to me. It was science. It was beyond my comprehension of realizing multiple dimensions and alternate realities and timelines. I could not comprehend it until over those 13 years, I started having experiences that completely explained it to me. And the one thing that I'll share with you, and I'll share with the listeners, because I have spoken about this before in the past, is they talk about that there is this matrix, you know, this ether. There's this ether that is connected to everything in the universe. And when they were doing the remote viewing, they realized that time is not horizontal. You don't go backwards and forwards. It's all vertical. It's all stacked on one another like a cube, and it's happening simultaneously. And what they also found out was they could go to those points within this matrix, within this cube, and they could access these time periods that they would be able to visualize and they'd be able to experience. But they also found that when they would go diagonally would take them to alternate realities, to other timelines. Now, when I was telling me this in 2006, I'm like, this sounds like science fiction. You got to be kidding me. But when you look at the research and you pop into some of the remote viewing that's been done, the Gateway program and other stuff, and the research on the ether, and then science looking at the double split and talking about alternate realities with the electrons, they follow them into other dimensions, you're like, holy cow. The problem is human mind, our society, is based on that one dimension, 24-hour clock, 365 days a year. We've been raised since a child to follow that on a day-to-day basis. For us to comprehend everything else is just, it's so difficult. It really is.
Yeah, it is. And I suppose for most people, terrifying. You know, it's that thing of, oh my God, if I accept that this is happening and this is real, what does that mean? What does that mean for me, for my loved ones, for the world? Is it worth getting up in the morning and going to work? Because, you know, what's the point? If it's so amazing, if we're so small and insignificant and what's going on is so much bigger, you know, some people would seriously just freak out. It's kind of brain explosion time, isn't it? You know, when you think, oh my God. But I think we're kind of starting to maybe understand ways to explore. I mean, I was talking to someone the other day, a retired scientist, about black holes. He was saying, you know, the incredible thing is that after all of the advances man has made, we still cannot explain what gravity is. We know what it does. We know its effects, but no one, even Isaac Newton, couldn't actually explain what gravity is. it's a thing, it's a something, it's an energy that's there. We know what it does. It keeps things where they should be, but we don't know what it is. If we can't even explain something as fundamental as the thing that keeps everything on this planet in its place, if we don't know what that really is, if we can't explain that, how can we really claim to understand anything about reality, about the world and the universe and what's going on? Never mind life and death and, spirits and ghosts and the paranormal. We just know so little. And I think this is what's really, it's always frustrated me. There's this kind of elitist academic side to the paranormal community, if you like. The people who believe that you only have an opinion if you have a PhD to go with it.
Right.
And it's the thing of, so do you actually realise how little any of us know? All of you with your PhDs and whatever, yeah, brilliant, well done, but you still know so little. We all know so little. And I think if everyone could just be open to the possibility that it's not all rubbish, that it's real, then we might actually get somewhere. The problem is when you have so many people trying to explain away the potential, then you run into problems. Why try to find what you consider a logical explanation for something that may be completely illogical in reality, but that's wonderful.
That's what I find fascinating about working with you during this series is, I know Barri and I will look at each other like, holy cow, is the perspective you have with the research you've done and the history and knowing some of these scientists and everything out there. The questions you've asked during some of the ITC and the EVP and your familiarity with place memory, as you were just discussing, something that I became really familiar with when I was doing Dead Famous, was the place memory to some of these locations, connecting with the past, like going back in time with Billy the Kid at Lincoln County Courthouse and getting the gunshots and the deputy yelling, "Help me!" That happened a long time ago, but through consciousness, like what Lynn Buchanan was talking about, we can access these other realms of time, because it's vertical, by focusing our thoughts to take us back there. And it's like you're opening it up and you're hearing it or experiencing it. And that's what some of these residual hauntings are, is when you see these time frames from the past that they've done. Like if you see a cart and horse go by, you see a house appear where it used to be over 100 years ago. Someone walking up and down the corridors with this lamp, their ghost may not still be there, but you're seeing that place memory, that residual energy. There are times, and I do believe some of those things are in the shows, is you get to hear that place audio, that place memory, where we tap into that past and you get to hear those responses from that time period, which I think it was great to have you there and all three of us to experience that together, because it's an adventure. It's like, we're doing an expedition into a different time period.
Yeah, we were really explorers, the intrepid explorers, like little kids. Honestly, it's just amazing. People see, paranormal entertainment, paranormal television as something, a lot of people don't take it seriously, do they? It's like, it's just entertainment. You get the message up at the beginning for entertainment purposes only, but there's so much that goes into it. And when you're that person and you're in that location and you have that experience, it can change your life. Seriously, it can change your life. You can be stood there thinking, I don't know about this. No, nothing's happening. And then suddenly you'll hear something. And it's just, wow. Oh my God. I mean, we saw it with the crew some of the time, with people who had no real interest in the paranormal before they filmed the series, no real belief in it. Suddenly they're hearing EVPs. And it's like, exactly. Wow. So
I'll never forget, we were in our hotel rooms, we're analyzing our audio from the investigation the previous night. And you message us, you guys got to come hear this. So we go to your room and you play back the audio and we're all like, oh my God. And then Barri gets up, starts hugging both of us. And I'm sitting there, he's like, this is just awesome. And people don't understand is sometimes when you see us get really excited, regardless how many times we've been doing this, we're at a completely different location. So it starts all over again. And when it starts all over again, we're trying to find that hidden gold. We're trying to find that bar of gold. We're trying to communicate, and not just communicate, but get something that we can take back to the client and that is revealing. And it's just, when we get it, we're like, yes. And it's like, oh my God. And it doesn't matter how many times you get it, it's always a different case. So the excitement is fresh. It's new because we realize we've made contact. We've got something that we can play to the owners, that, we can cherish, that we've uncovered. It's like, archaeologists finding pots or pans or things from 1,000 years ago, or dinosaur bones, and going, oh my God, I found this new dinosaur. I found this rare dinosaur bone. It's the same thing. So, some people might say, hey, it's over the top, this and that, but you know what? Doesn't matter how many years you've been doing it, you get excited when you get these great results.
Well, yeah, because that's what you're there for, isn't it? And every single location you're stepping into the unknown again, aren't you? It's brand new. Right. You have no idea. And we're not arrogant enough to assume that we understand every single paranormal experience, all the phenomena. So we're learning as well. We go to these places and something will happen. It's like, wow, that's a first for me. But, and that happened, didn't you? In the series, we dealt with some things that aren't your average kind of paranormal investigation type stuff.
It's like, are you kidding me? It's like, boom, my mind just got blown open by what just occurred. Yeah. Boom, this is like a whole new perspective. People are going to see that. They're going to question it. They're going to be like, trust us, for us, we were even discussing, like, my God, do we want to present this to the owners? Because this is just so far out there. But you know what? It's like, hey, that's our job. We make these discoveries and we present it. And that's what was so exciting about this past season, was some of the stuff that we uncovered was just so insane.
Yeah. It was. And it just changes your whole perspective, because then, of course, after we'd had a couple of experiences and we went to new locations, suddenly you find, oh, well, hang on a minute, maybe, there's another way of looking at this. There's a new perspective. So, we did find that we were kind of challenging ourselves and we were learning as well as we went along. But that's the important thing. I think, it doesn't matter how many years you do this. You never know everything. You never have every experience there is to be had. So that's why we react the way we do sometimes, because it's like, I didn't know that before. Wow.
Exactly. And it's like priceless when we have like a direct voice phenomenon. We're investigating, all of a sudden you hear something and everybody looks at everybody like, did you hear that? Yes, I did. It's not just in my head. We all heard it collectively. And sometimes we freeze because oh my God. It's like, let's go find out what had just happened. Let's go pursue what just occurred. So it's exciting. It's exciting. I had this theory that just popped into my head a few days ago. And I thought about this once before, but I started thinking about more. I said, because that could be, it's just a possibility. What if some of the experiences we have when we're younger in seeing ghosts is actually us from the future, where we're thinking about the past and there's a quick glimpse of our older self appearing as an energy form to our child self?
Chris, my brain just exploded.
Because, I was sitting there thinking about a couple experiences when I was younger, and I remember the one, I was talking to my buddy, he's like the VP, whatever, of Fender Guitar in Asia. And he was at my house in third grade when this ghost appeared. And the odd thing about it was so different than other ghosts. It was this energetic form, older male, and he's looking around to left or right, like didn't even know why he was there. Like he was lost, like, oh my God, where am I? Where am I? But yet I was seeing this, and I screamed, and my dad came in the room, turned the light on, I went and slept in my dad's room. And I kept replaying that over a couple of days ago, going, with this gateway program, what if I had somehow, over the years of meditation stuff I've done, sent myself, whether in the dream state or awakened state, to the past and appeared to myself at that particular incident? Because the more I look at that, it's like, God, that does look like a version of me when I was older, now that I look back on that. The only way to know for sure, of course, would be hypnotic regression and go back to that time period. But what if some of these ghosts we are seeing are ourselves going back in time, appearing for a brief moment, and then some of these apparitions or ghosts we're seeing is just ourselves or other people that are appearing, right in front of us? It's just a whole nother form of I don't even know what to call it.
But do you know what? It would explain deja vu.
Yeah.
Because it would be, okay, I'm sure I've been here before. I'm sure I've done this before. I know what's coming next. Or maybe we have. Maybe that is because we sent ourselves there in the. Do you know, I know of a case where, and this is a similar kind of thing. About 15 years ago, there were some reports coming into a local newspaper that a ghost had been seen. It was a woman dressed in 1960s clothing, and she was passing from a hotel, walking over the road to the bank. And it was always on a Monday morning, really unusual. But then she would fade away when she reached the bank across the street. And it was in the newspapers, and people were asked, come forward if you've seen it. Have you seen the ghostly lady? And someone got in touch with the newspaper to say, I think that's me. And she went on to explain that in the 60s, she worked in the hotel. And on a Monday morning, she used to bank the takings from the weekend. She used to walk across the road at around 10:30 to the bank. And she said, the ghost that people are seeing is me. It describes me exactly, wearing the clothes I used to wear, what my hair was like. It was kind of an imprint, a recording that was there, but she wasn't dead. So it's this thing of, do we leave an imprint everywhere we go? Our energy, once it's there, does it stay there? And potentially, could we go back? Might that younger version of her have seen an older version? If she went there, would she see the younger version of herself?
Right.
You could tie yourself up in knots with it, but it's fascinating. I think I just really believe that one day, maybe not in my lifetime, but I think one day we will realise, or we will make a discovery of some kind, and we will realise that this world that we think we see is just the tip of the iceberg, that actually there is so much more. There may even be more than one of us. When you get that, maybe that's what deja vu is. Maybe the other us is a split second in front or behind. I don't know. Parallel dimensions.
Yeah, see, that's the thing is, I discussed this in my Gateway podcast a few months ago, is when I was doing the Gateway program, you do the energy bar tool. Mm-hmm. You create this energy bar tool. And as I was creating the energy bar tool, like the 20th time, whatever, during one of the sessions, I said, what's behind the energy bar tool? And if you can send this somewhere, where would I send it? I want to know what's behind it. And then as my conscious went behind the energy bar tool, it opened up and I saw Bachelor's Grove Cemetery and this bar floating, and I'm right behind the bar. Mm-hmm. And I look down and I see myself and these other investigators looking up going, what the hell is that? And I remember back to one of my fond memories in 98, 99, when this bar of light appeared at Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, and we all turned and witnessed it and wondered what the hell it was. And I realized, oh my God, my future self sent it there while I was doing the Gateway program. So it wasn't anything paranormal. It was consciousness. I projected it to the past without realizing it. So when you look at something like that, you got to wonder, is it possible we can send ourselves? Now, during my readings and stuff that I've done for people over the years, the last 15 years, I've had people, and the first people that told me this, I thought, okay, they're nuts. They're just making this up, whatever. But they say, you came to me in my dream, or we went somewhere astrally and you were teaching me stuff. And it happens consistently. So why wouldn't the soul and spirit, when it's outside the physical body, when we're in the sleep state, not be able to travel, meet other people, go to other timelines and stuff like that? I mean, it's completely possible if we realize the soul is not restricted to the third dimension, yet it only exists in the body when we're in the awakened state. So that's something to ponder. That could be some of these paranormal experiences be projections of ourself going backwards in time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it reminds me of a case actually as well. I worked on a few years ago. A guy he used to live in a house near the sea, and it was opposite the sea. It was in a place called Barmouth in Wales. And he moved to London. But when he was about 35, he started dreaming about his childhood home in Barmouth. And every night he would dream that he was in the house, walking up and down upstairs, not really doing anything, but he was just there. So he was pacing, walking up and down the stairs. Around the same time, the family who were living in that house said that the son had started seeing a ghost. started seeing a man walking up and down on the landing and up and down the stairs. So the guy who used to live there was now living in London, started dreaming that he was back in the childhood home in Wales. The people living in the house in Wales start seeing him there.
Wow.
Which is exactly what you're talking about.
Wow.
This projection, our consciousness when our body is asleep. We can project ourselves. But I read a book years ago called The Boy Who Saw True, and it was the diaries of a little boy who realised at a very young age, about 10, that he had abilities. He didn't know what they were, but part of his abilities were these kind of dream visitations that he could consciously make to people and places. And I think for many years he was told it was just kind of, imagination. But he started writing it down, and they published his diaries after he passed away as an old man. And it's fascinating reading.
Oh, I'll have to read that. That sounds really interesting. Now, you've also, obviously, you're getting your second degree right now in history.
Yeah, history and archaeology.
Oh, that's fascinating. Now, you give talks, lectures, and you do, what else do you do with your group?
We do events. So, we do public events. Not many, probably about 8 or 9 a year, where people can come along and investigate with us. But, I do workshops at a local university on the paranormal. So they're like half a day. People can come and just explore. Very kind of easygoing, not in depth. But, I just like to make it accessible for people. I think, that whole thing going back to, you don't need a PhD, exploring the paranormal, it can be anyone's passion. You don't need any qualifications. You just need an interest and a passion for it. I've always tried to do that. I designed an online course for people who, don't have the confidence to go out and join a group or don't have the time, just want to sit at home but want to do some research on the paranormal. So I tutor an online course in it as well.
And your website that they can go to the course, is that the Jayne-Harris.com?
It's hdparanormal.com. So that, hdparanormal.com. That's where our kind of events and my talks and things like that usually are,
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, so you've written also 2 books, What Dwells Within and Peggy the Doll, both of which became Amazon Supernatural Genres bestsellers in their first week of release. And occasionally you will write, you're a columnist for several magazines and write blogs and online articles for a variety of platforms.
Yeah, when I get time. Yes.
Yeah, I understand.
I do. I've written a few bits and bobs for Haunted Magazine. That is one, definitely, I love Haunted Magazine. The guys there are great. I've done a few articles for them over the years. And the books, I don't know how that came about, really. I think I just kind of one day decided I need to start writing this down, because if, God forbid, I lose my memory or something, I need some kind of record of some of these experiences. So, it turned into books. But I love doing it. I think it's very kind of, it's very cathartic when you write a book. I know a lot of people say that, but it is. It's like suddenly you remember things that were forgotten, that were deeply lodged in there. And it's amazing how much detail you can remember of a specific event once you start writing about it.
Right.
So,
well, those people can go to Amazon and they can get the book, What Dwells Within and Peggy the Doll. Also, if they want to schedule with you or check out some of the events you have coming up in the future, they can go to hdparanormal.com. Also, they can go there if they want to take one of the online courses.
Yeah, they can. Absolutely.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, do you still have the website, Jayne-Harris.com?
Yes, I do. Yeah, that's my own website. So that's HD Paranormal is a huge site. There's so much on there. People's stories, photos, all sorts. So Jayne-Harris.com, yeah.
What do you have coming up next?
So in 2 weeks, we have an investigation at a place called Bliss Hill Museum, which is a Victorian town. It's 50 acres. And there are mines there, there are factories, there are so many old buildings. It's huge. It's a good job I have my whole team with me to cover it. So we're looking forward to that. And then I've got bits and pieces going on throughout December, different events and stuff. And then next year, I'm doing some weekend breaks. So they're eerie escapes. So But,
oh, that sounds like fun.
So just a whole weekend to kind of explore haunted places and just spend time with like-minded people, really, having conversations like this. It's nice for people to just get away and do that. So we've got 3 of those next year.
A lot of people in the paranormal say that they've had something that happened when they were younger or experience that got them into the field, that gave them that interest. What was it for you that got you started and interested in the paranormal?
I probably can't remember the earliest experience. I know that my first memory of something that I considered paranormal was when I was 13. Looking back, I think that things happened before that, but at the time I just didn't recognise them as paranormal. But when I was 13, my grandfather had just passed away. He'd probably been passed about 2 months, and I was at home at my parents' house, and I was upstairs, and my parents were out in the garden, so there was no one else in the house, and I distinctively heard a crash downstairs, followed by my granddad's cough. He had a very distinctive, he was a heavy smoker, so he had this very kind of deep, very distinctive cough, and for a split second I actually forgot that he passed away, because it was just so clear, and I just felt for a second that he was there in the house. And I then quickly remembered, hang on, that can't be my grandfather. And so I quickly ran downstairs and I went in the kitchen, and he'd been in the RAF, and we had this huge tin with all of his military paperwork, documents, and that had fallen from a dresser at the other end of the kitchen, and it was now sort of maybe 12, 15 feet at the other end of the room, open with all of the paperwork scattered across the floor. There was no one in the house, no one in the room, no animals or anything either. So I was just kind of, oh, wow. I just stood there and I thought, okay, I've heard him. This is, a sign maybe. So I just kind of took it as, okay, he's possibly still around, he's just letting us know that he's still here. But that's the first thing really that triggered my interest. Of course, I grew up listening to my parents talking about the paranormal. Both of my parents are, I don't think they would call themselves spiritualists, but they've always had an interest, and each of them have both had experiences throughout their lives and still do.
Oh,
so
wow.
I kind of grew up listening to those stories, hearing them telling their friends. But yeah, until that happened to me, it was sort of something I didn't really consider. I wasn't really that interested in. It was just something that my parents were interested in.
Were you close to your grandfather?
No, that's the interesting thing. I was very close to my grandmother, but not really my grandfather. I didn't know him very well at all. And when he passed away, it was strange because obviously it upset my father very much. It was his father. And so that upset me.
Yeah.
But no, it wasn't as if, if he came back to give a sign to anyone, I would never think it would be me.
Did you tell your dad what happened? I mean, your parents?
Yeah, I did. And they kind of took it and accepted it as that he was there. He was, maybe there is something in this paperwork that he wants us to read or to know about or learn about. Or so we did. We went through everything. It was all of his records where he'd been overseas and work he'd done with the RAF. There was nothing kind of standout, but it was all paperwork that we hadn't actually sat and read at all as a family. So whether that was the kind of nudge, when hey, look at this, read this, this is my life, this is what I did. But it was definitely a kind of spark for me. The real catalyst came later when I was 17. And my cousin, who was like my sister, we were very close. She died in a car accident. She was 16. Wow. And so at 17, suddenly then I went from being interested and intrigued to really needing to know, I suppose, that there is something else.
Right.
Because, it suddenly becomes very, very personal when it's someone really close to you.
Right.
So, that was kind of the catalyst that got me involved. But there were no groups that I could join. At that time, there wasn't any kind of Facebook or anything like that. So I just went to the library, read what I could, went and sat in graveyards with a torch.
Wait, sound like my past. That's what I did. Went to the library and sat at the graveyards.
What a cool kid. I had loads of friends.
That's right. They didn't say much, but hey.
Yeah. So that was it really. And then it was really when I kind of found other people, so social media, that I kind of thought, wow, there are other people who are really interested in this as well. And it kind of snowballed then, but it's always just ticked over as a bit of a hobby in the background, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some people will have one shocking moment, that one paranormal experience that just, gives them that curiosity the rest of their life. And then some people have multiple things that go over a period of time that really gets them intrigued and interested in pursuing it. Everybody has a different story. In your years of cases and investigating, researching, and doing ITC and digging up history, was there one thing that stood out that was just really remarkable to you, whether it was a piece of evidence or a story? Can you share with us?
There's quite a few. I've got some favourite stories which are, to me, fascinating because they are proof of place memory. So, we were talking earlier about this idea that, not just stone tape theory, but anywhere, a place, a piece of land, a building, anything can hold that residual energy, that imprint, and can replay that recording, if you like, that echo. And It's fascinating because here in the UK, there are a few museums, open-air museums, where the buildings have actually, you may have this in America as well, the buildings have been taken apart very carefully from their original location and rebuilt to create a museum. We have a Victorian museum here, and it's all Victorian buildings. And what's interesting is that I've learned some of these buildings are displaying paranormal activity connected to their original location. It's almost like that energy is stored within the fabric of the building and has moved with it. There's a really fascinating case of Roman soldiers in a cellar in York, it's a place called Merchant's House. And in the late 1980s, I think early 90s, there was a retired policeman in the cellar doing some work down there. He knew the owner. And he suddenly saw what he described almost as a legion of Roman soldiers marching through the cellars of this building. Now, he was a really straight-laced, he'd been a police officer. He was no nonsense. He didn't particularly believe in anything like that, but he couldn't explain what he was seeing. The fascinating thing was that he could only see the soldiers from the knees up. He couldn't see the lower part of their leg. Now, his description of what he saw goes into vivid detail, from what they're wearing to the shields they're holding. None of them looked at him, of course. They all kept looking directly ahead and marched on. And when he researched the building, he found that the old Roman road had been about 1.5 to 2 feet below the present cellar level, which would, of course, explain why he couldn't see the bottom of their legs. And what was interesting about it was that the way he described the outfits that they were wearing, it wasn't how historians had traditionally interpreted Roman soldiers, and yet we now know that actually it was accurate. So even if he'd read history books, he wouldn't have described the Roman soldiers in that way. He kind of knew that information without, before the historians did. So it just struck me as fascinating, because there is a case where you think, well, that has to have happened. How else do you explain that? He has to have seen what he claims to have seen.
Absolutely.
So yeah, those kind of really historical cases fascinate me. But as far as a personal case, I'd have to say it's Peggy the doll.
Really?
And purely because she just threw me. That case just caught me off guard. I didn't, at that time, so this was sort of 2014, I'd been sort of investigating for maybe, how long, 98, about 15 years-ish. So I kind of liked to think that I had a fairly broad understanding of what I might be dealing with when I went into certain places, or at least have, enough experience to work with it. When that case came along, I just wasn't prepared. For one, I'd never really dealt with a case of an object before. It had always been buildings, or land places. And it was just one of those remarkable things where I just could not explain what was happening. And I knew that what people were experiencing was not suggestion, because for the first 6 months, everyone's experience was completely private. I hadn't posted a photograph. I'd posted no information publicly about the fact that I was working with this doll. But things like strokes and heart attacks and mediums having visions of Jewish Holocaust victims and all of this stuff, that I was just thinking, this is crazy. This is a doll. You know, how on earth can this happen? And it took me a while, months actually, to kind of get my head around this idea that, well, yeah, of course, if I believe that a building can be haunted, you know, if I believe that spirits or residual energy can remain, then I suppose by default I also have to believe that it's possible around an object, because a building is only a large inanimate object, isn't it? You know, it's just made of atoms, molecules, like, you know, like a doll or like an old pocket watch or a wedding ring or anything like that. So that case threw me. It was 2 years of kind of being on the border between fear and intrigue. You know, when you kind of...
So wait a minute, you kept that doll?
I had the doll for 2 years in my cellar, which is just the creepiest thing. I mean, literally, she wasn't in a cabinet. She was sat on a chair.
No. Dolls, I just don't like dolls. No. Do you know, a buddy of mine bought me Robert the doll, and it's a replica. And I get that. I go, why'd you get this? And we go, well, that's like dude, I don't want some possessed doll. He goes, well, it's not the real doll, but I don't care. There's negativity attached to it. Well, only if you piss it off. I go, well, now you pissed me off. You know, so I've got it in a box, you know, and I want to sell this thing on eBay because I just don't, I won't even look at it because I don't want anything that could possibly be attached to it, or my perception will attach something to it. You know, we talk about the doll, you talk about the soldiers, you're dealing with place memory, but then also you're dealing with a form of psychometry where energy, emotions are absorbed into that inanimate object. That can also attract negative things to it because of those emotions. It feeds off of it. I mean, did you have anything paranormal happen with the doll?
Yeah, well, when we got the doll home back to our house, it was probably about 2 weeks, and the previous owner had been really, really ill. She began suffering with insomnia because she would lie in bed at night and she would hear footsteps around the bed. She would hear the bathroom light going off and on, and it all started when she brought this doll into the house.
Oh, boy.
So I took the doll, and we were like, right, okay, let's see what's going on. And this is the kind of curious side, isn't it, to human nature. It's like, okay, you know, not a good idea, but I'm going to do it. And so honestly, within 2 weeks, I was so ill. I couldn't move from the bed. It was literally, my husband had to take the girls to school. It was just crazy. It was ridiculous. It just wasn't working. And in the end, a medium visited me and she said, have you brought anything into the house recently? Anything new? Or, you know, and I said, well, I have. Let me show you. And I called my husband and he brought the doll in, and she took one look at the doll and said, whoa, okay, I think I know what your problem is. And she just began telling me that this doll had this really dark, negative, heavy energy around it.
Right.
And she said, I want to prove it to you. I will take the doll. She said, don't worry about me. I'll protect myself. I've dealt with things like this before. Let me take it away for a week and just tell me how you feel. Well, she did, and it took about 4 days, and I was back on my feet.
Wow.
I was fine.
Wow.
Now, you know, yes, there could have been a psychological element there, a suggestion, I don't know. But all I know is I could not explain the change. I couldn't explain the illness, and I couldn't explain how quickly it lifted. And so from that moment, I thought, okay, you know, either way, whether I believe it or not, I need to be careful. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I need to protect myself. So when the doll came back, we did all kinds of, you know, I surrounded her in salt. I was like, right, okay, if she's going down in the cellar, cabinet circle, my rosary beads, which I'd been to Rome a few years before and been to the Vatican and bought these rosary beads. And I'm not a particularly religious person, although my family are Catholic. But I took these rosary beads down, draped them over the cabinet. I was like, right, that's it. You know, there's no chance now. But, you know, we had the odd, unusual thing. Things seem to happen to other people a lot more than me.
Yeah.
But then my kids started to get a little bit older. And my eldest, when she reached 3, she was the same size as Peggy, because Peggy's a big doll.
Yeah.
And they actually began to look alike, and it was quite disturbing. My daughter had blonde hair and blue eyes. Oh, no. And I was just kind of like, do you know what? I think it's time that this doll moved on. So it was just bizarre. And when people say to me, what's the weirdest case you've ever worked on? It has to be Peggy.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, come on.
There's just nothing before or since has came close to being as freaky, as weird as that.
Nothing scarier than a possessed doll.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's this thing, isn't there? Because it's that thing of the eyes. I mean,
yes.
With Peggy now, even if I see a photograph of Peggy, I can't stare at her face for too long before feeling uncomfortable. It's almost like I feel rude because I'm staring.
Right.
And I think, why should that happen? But, there's loads of folklore around dolls, isn't there? And Japanese puppeteers used to take the puppets apart, didn't they? After a performance, because they believed that if they didn't, that evil spirits could inhabit the puppets and run around.
How crazy is that? I remember you talk about dolls in the one encounter I had as a child when we had all this paranormal stuff going on, the voices being heard, shadows and stuff, waking up at night. I had a little doll that my mom gave me. It was Ranger. It was a little boy doll, and it's from like the 1940s or 50s, whatever it was. And it would sit on my mantle in my room. And I remember I was watching, once my dad or mom were watching Twilight Zone, and there's an episode where this ventriloquist doll or this doll comes alive, and it scared the heck out of me. Yeah. So when I was laying in bed, I would look at that doll going, if the doll, that head, or the head of that doll moves, or that doll moves, I'm going to be terrified. Well, like a couple nights later, I had the doll on the shelf. I go to bed, I wake up, and I'm looking right on the shelf, and it's not there, so I'm panicking, I'm freaking out. I roll over, and the doll is on my pillow staring at me. No. I scream. I race out of the room. Mommy, Daddy, the doll's alive, just like on the TV, it's alive. They're like, what? They come back in my room, they're like, Chris, maybe you got up in the middle of the night and you put it. No, I didn't. And then Reggie, did you put this? No, I didn't touch his doll. He's getting too old for a doll. And after that I said, Mom, I don't want it anymore. Take it. It's alive. It's possessed. I can't remember the exact words I used. My mom took it away. My mom gave it to me like about 10 years ago. She kept it in a box and gave it back to me. I'm like, oh my God, this doll. And then I'm going to my head. I realize now the doll was not possessed. It was those, other entities that were in the house that did that because they knew my fear. I projected my fear in the room before I went to bed going, if that doll moves and this and that, they did that, not the doll. But since then, dolls freak me out.
It's understandable. I think, they're just. Clowns. I'm not too bad with clowns. I know a lot of people, are a bit kind of. It doesn't bother me.
Yeah, dolls, I know a lot of clowns.
Yeah. That's another show. But dolls. They're kind of. I think they'll always have that about them. Whether films get made or not, Annabelle, Robert, whatever. Right. But I just think it's that thing because they're kind of made in our likeness, aren't they? It's like this little human with these dead eyes that actually there is no life behind, or is there with some of them? That's the thing. People kind of used to say to me, I hate looking at pictures or videos of Peggy. I just think her head will turn and she'll look at me quickly and all this. So it's imagination to a degree, but weird, very weird case. And I know that lots of things have happened since she's been in Vegas.
Really?
In the museum. There's videos going up on YouTube and people having some really weird experiences, which I guess when you take a building full of objects that have got weird histories and weird energies and stuff, you will get things happen.
You haven't been there yet, have you? Have you been to the museum?
No. Well, I went there before it opened. Right. I went there with Peggy, but it kind of wasn't finished. So I haven't seen it, as is. I've heard it's amazing.
Yeah, it is. Barry and I were there, and we saw the doll. I remember Barry pointed it out, and I said, okay, I'm getting out of the room. So, Jayne, tell me, in your field, obviously you're fascinated by cases, you're fascinated by history and ITC. What is it you would like to focus on in your career or contribute to this genre, at some point in your life?
Ooh, big question. Well, I am fascinated by ITC, as you know. I think that if we can genuinely make contact and hear those spirit voices, it's all very well kind of having other things happening, lights flashing or whatever, EMF meters going off, but actually to hear the voice of someone that's passed, that's unquestionable. And I remember when I was younger, when I was about 16, I read about Frederick Jurgensen for the first time, recording the bird song and hearing his mother's voice. And I just thought, wow, that is amazing. And then I started digging a bit deeper, and I found out that actually years before, 1920s, 1930s, Thomas Edison, of course, famous inventor, he was patenting or working on a spirit phone. And this was like, wow, okay. So these are well-respected, educated people who are, Nikola Tesla, who are genuinely believing that we can create a device that can enable us to communicate with people who've passed over. This is big. So I spent a long time really looking into that, and it's still one of my passions. And I would at some point, this would be the dream, to actually try to put together an experiment of my own, incorporating all of my kind of favourite elements, I suppose, of everyone else's experiments, but just trying to tighten up on the controls. And that's the hardest part, because things like the Gansfield experiment, which to some people is amazing evidence of ESP, to other people, they just think it's completely flawed. They think, oh, well, yeah, they were in a room, they had headphones on, but they could hear the people next door, surely. And it's about, how do you rule out these other factors? So I think I'd like to do that. I'd like to work on trying to put together something that's my baby, if you like, an experiment, something that really, for me, is exciting and seems to give me results. But also, I've worked for quite a few years now on trying to make the paranormal accessible to people who think it's something that's not for them. We've got, within the paranormal community, unfortunately, we have these pockets of so-called academics, the parapsychologists, the scientists, who are really, really quick to shoot down anyone if they don't have a PhD, if they don't, if they didn't go to university or whatever. And that's why I put together my online courses, because I want people to know that it can be anyone's passion. Anyone can research the paranormal, anyone can have an interest, and anyone can come up with a good idea of how to try to communicate with those in spirit. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to be a scientist. So one of the things I'm most proud of over the last sort of 3 years is just the number of people who I've been able to help access paranormal research. There's a long way to go, but that's kind of one of the little marks that I hope to leave, in the small pockets of the community that know about me and know about the work that I do. I just want people to realise that you can learn about this stuff, you can practice this stuff, you can get involved. You don't have to be in, a member of some kind of elite society to do that.
That's fantastic. And that's great to hear. And everybody listening, Jayne's does these events, and she goes out there and educates people on how things work and what it is, and talks about the history. And you have people that just go out to do it just to make money, but they don't really have that passion. They don't have that interest in all the stuff like you do. And I think that's what's great, because when you speak it, you can tell that, this woman knows what she's talking about, but she's also very, very passionate and very into this. And that's really cool.
Yeah, it is. It's hard. How it is, sometimes it peaks and it dips. Sometimes you think, why am I still doing this? Or you'll get kind of confrontational people who look to shoot you down, or, and it's hard sometimes. But I think underlying all of that, for me, and I think for a lot of us, it's that passion. No one's going to knock that out of me just because they don't agree with it or believe in it or whatever. It's, it's my thing. So as long as I still have an interest, then I'll keep doing what I'm doing.
That's great to hear. Well, Jayne, I want to thank you very much for being on Spirit Talk. You were a pleasure. And, of course, it's always awesome working with you as well.
You too, Chris. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. This is Chris Fleming and Jayne Harris, and you've been listening to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. I'll see you next month.